Hello, I am the Rocketeer Lady, MK Smith, and welcome to the Delta V podcast. This podcast is devoted to highlighting and amplifying women and other minority voices in the STEM industry, not only highlighting their professional path and their STEM career, but also pulling back the curtain to showcase the amazing diverse people that make up this industry. We are here to smash the traditional and hopefully provide some tips and laughs along the way. No matter if you're watching us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, please remember to rate, like, and subscribe. Let's blast off into it. Dr. Carrie Olsen holds a bachelor's and master's degree in aerospace engineering from Mississippi State University, my alma mater, and received her PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. She has a diverse and exciting career at NASA that includes Payload Operations Director for the International Space Station. She has been chief of the Guidance, Navigation, and Mission Analysis branch and is currently involved as project manager for the NextGen STEM project out of the NASA Office of STEM Engagement. Since I met Carrie, I have admired her grit and professionalism in the industry. She's always been available for mentorship and guidance throughout many young engineers' lives, including my own. Carrie, thanks so much for joining me on the Delta V podcast today.
Hi, Mary Kate. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. So first off, I want to welcome you on, and also I want to hear what you're currently doing right now at NASA.
Well, as you said in the intro, about almost 3 years ago, I made the giant career leap from being a technical practitioner and manager and whatever, to stepping over into the STEM engagement world. So it used to be called the Office of Education. In 2018, it was renamed, and now it's the Office of STEM Engagement. It was sort of this random opportunity that I saw or heard about to do a rotation to NASA headquarters in DC. And I had spent my whole NASA career at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. I'd never even been to headquarters. It had never really been an option because I had kids and, just a busy life and, mom taking off to go live in DC for 6-8 months was not really a happening thing. My youngest had started college already, and it was just the right opportunity at the right time. So I stepped in. I went to DC at the end October of 2018 through June of 2019 in person. At first, I served as their executive officer, which was really cool. I'd never done anything like that, but it gave me a window into the inner workings of the agency and how it interacts with Congress and OMB and all this stuff that I had never seen before. And then I stepped into, they were going through a transformation process in the agency to kind of bring all the parts of STEM engagement at all the NASA centers together under our associate administrator. And I served as the deputy project manager for that effort. And then when I was done with that, I was still detailed to headquarters. I had decided at that point that being involved with STEM engagement, really that educational outreach part of inspiring the next generation, was really what I wanted to do. And so they had an opportunity that came open for me to step into running the NextGen STEM project, which focuses on K-12, the younger kids, not the collegiate part. And I was just like, whatever you guys want me to do, I just want to stay permanently. So as of March 1st of last year, right as things were shutting down, I became project manager of a nationwide team. And I've been living in this reality for the last year and a half of, working with a nationwide team through Zoom and just trying to revitalize that project, take it to the next level, increase our reach, broadening student participation, trying to reach the kids that are so often left behind in STEM. And I have an amazing team. A lot of them are former classroom educators. They are just so dedicated and energetic and positive. I just love leading that team. I told him the other day, and this is probably the highest compliment I could give him, that when I left the operations world, the console world that I know, that whole team dynamic, that team leadership thing, I highly value the chance to lead high-performing teams. I honestly thought I wouldn't find that again, right? I had this flash. And I was talking to a town hall of this, 70, 80 people that support this team nationally. And I told them, I said, it's just like that. I didn't think I'd find that again. But I said, you are an incredibly gifted, dedicated, high-performing team. And I'm honored to be your leader.
Right.
But yeah, it feels very full circle at this point in my life to be doing this kind of work as opposed to the the doing of engineering and stuff.
Right.
It feels like the right thing at the right time because I was that kid,
Right.
40, 50 years ago. Who somehow got inspired to do something that females generally did not do.
Right. Let's dive into that piece, right? Because like I do think that's incredibly like a full circle moment, right? Where you're kind of filling the gap that was not present necessarily for you. So what brought you into your path of pursuing aerospace engineering, right? What inspired you to pursue such a male dominated industry?
You can call it talking points or whatever, but we throw around the term the Artemis generation a lot in NASA right now. We talk about the kids of today being the Artemis generation, counterpoint to the fact that I've always self-identified as a child of Apollo.
Oh.
So Apollo was the backdrop of my childhood. I think you can't discount that effect. Right. I can remember watching Walter Cronkite with the little models and walking us all through what was going on in these different missions. Those are some of my earliest memories. I can remember standing on the porch at age 5 trying to see Neil Armstrong because I was so young and my parents were trying to, put us in front of the TV and show us this amazing moment in human history. I was that kid, though, that also thought they could see Rudolph on Christmas Eve in the sky. I had
I was too.
So there I was running out to the front porch to see if I could see, Neil and Buzz standing on the moon, right?
Wow.
But so that was definitely there. And then sounds like the corniest story known to mankind, but I do share it. Like it literally came to me in a dream. I was probably about 12 and I just had this really vivid dream one night. I was flying through the sky. I had never been in a plane in my life. And I was flying through the sky in this dream without benefit of a plane, by the way, just flying through the sky. Just
Right.
me. And it was so vivid and so intense. And I remember waking up the next morning, I couldn't forget it. I just couldn't get past it. And I had this strong feeling that it was telling me something about my future,
Yeah.
And being a child, let's see, if I was 12, it's probably about 1975-ish. My immediate thought was, because that was the role open to me, oh, maybe I'm meant to be a stewardess. We called them that back then, and they were all female. And they weren't flight attendants, they were stewardesses. And then that somehow didn't sit well with me, right? And over the course of probably, I would say, the next 3 or 4 days, my brain went from that to pilot to astronaut. And I don't know why, because there were no role models for that in 1975. There were barely any for pilot. There weren't any for astronaut. The other key part to this, I think, is the other backdrop to my childhood was that I had the most amazing parent. And I know that I'm truly blessed. They had taught us from day one, early and often, all 3 of us, 1 male, 2 female children, was there is absolutely nothing you cannot do if you're willing to work hard enough for it. Don't expect anyone to hand it to you, but there are no limits. You're smart, you're capable, go for it. That was the message, always. And so that's how I think my brain was able to take that leap from stewardess to astronaut at age 12. And then to not only just think it, but to go make it happen. Now, I didn't become an astronaut, the terrible eyes. And honestly, I did carry that aspiration into my NASA career, but probably somewhere around the time my oldest was born, I was sort of like, I knew it was a long shot with the eyesight thing. And, LASIK wasn't a thing yet. The other thing was you just have to be comfortable with the fact that you're risking your life.
Right.
And where I might have chosen to risk it for myself, looking at her, I could not envision risking it for her. And that doesn't say anything negative against astronauts and those who choose to do that, mothers, fathers, whatever they are. Just for me, everybody has to do their own risk assessment, right? Like you have to do your own personal risk assessment. And I just realized that was not me. Also, by that time, I was in a role where I was very much working with and enabling astronauts in their daily work.
Right.
And I realized that was just as valid and really did scratch the itch of the dream, right? So that was kind of when I made that shift in my head. The 12-year-old dream just shifted a little. It didn't go away, it just shifted.
We both went to Mississippi State. So what was the diversity like whenever you were attending Mississippi State? I know that's kind of a leading question because I think I know the answer.
Yeah, you probably know the answer. Let's see. When I started as a freshman, there was me and my friend Lisa, and we were the only females in aerospace engineering, at least in our class. There may have been a couple of upperclassmen. There was a handful. like maybe 2 or 3 above us
Okay.
in the whole department.
And how was that? Did you even
Honestly,
notice it, or was it
well,
not a
I
big
mean, I
deal?
expected it, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I was just happy there were any other.
For sure.
I don't know. I guess because I never expected anything different. It was, I'm not
Just the
gonna lie, I
norm.
like boys. So, you know,
Right.
it was, by and large, it was in the aerospace department, and I had some of the same professors, oddly enough, that you did, even though we're quite a few years apart in age. Dr. Koenig was there. He
Yep.
looked like he was 12 back then. I thought he was a grad student the first time I saw him, and then
Yep.
I found out who he was, and I was like, oh, not grad student. Actually, very accomplished person. Professor Clyett was the department head. He personally recruited me, like
Wow.
hard recruited me.
Really?
From out of state. And the department itself couldn't have been more welcoming. Honestly, my fellow students were very welcoming. I don't remember any like, oh, you're a girl, you shouldn't be here kind of things. No, they realized really quick that I was pretty smart and that they probably wanted me in their homework group.
Right. Right.
So there's that. I won't say that that's true across the university, especially when I had to take things like EE classes for non-EEs, electrical
Yeah.
engineering,
Engineering.
that
Yeah.
I did encounter a hardcore sexist jerk. There's some stories in there, but luckily for me,
We can go into those.
yeah, they were few and far between. And he's long since dead. That was a thing in my sophomore year that wasn't fun, but by and large, it was pretty open. I just kind of trucked along, through bachelor's. Like I said, probably because I've heard you sometimes talk about imposter syndrome. There was probably a part of me that thought that sooner or later I was going to come upon a class that was too hard
Mm-hmm.
and that I wasn't going to make it. So that was, even though like I had, high ACT scores, I had nearly a perfect GPA in a really tough college prep high school. I had the chops to be there, right? But somewhere inside of me, I didn't really know because everything in the external world told me that girls can't be engineers, right?
Right.
And
Right.
even though I had that chip on my shoulder that, yeah, really, hide and watch, about to do this right now. There was a part late at night, when you're studying for a really hard exam or something, that was like, this is it. This is where I run into the thing that's too hard and I'm not going to make it. But I did. And actually, I was kind of blowing the doors off of it. GPA. Wow.
I hope a lot of listeners are like coming here and they're kind of going through the trenches, right, that we went through. What are some things that you did whenever you're at your lowest, right, where you're like that imposter syndrome is knocking at your door, right, and telling you like you can't do it? Is there anything that you pulled on?
A number of things, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes you just have to remind yourselves of the facts that you are doing pretty well and know this one test, no matter how it turns out, is not going to make or break you, right?
Oh,
There's
that's good. Yeah.
sometimes you can't always find that perspective in the moment. I think
Right.
I said, despite, I didn't have any female role models, but I had some wonderful male ones. Like
Right.
Professor Clyett brought me there. He was always available when I really needed something. Another one was Keith Koenig. Another one was Phil Bridges, who is still a dear friend of mine to this day.
Yeah, I know what Dr. Bridges.
They were kind of, always there. I had great friends. There was that soundtrack running in the back of my head of my parents and that deep belief they had in me and that they instilled in me. I will say, I am a person of faith, and that was always, sort of that rock base that I can turn to too. But, it was just a kind of a combination of the things that I'm terrible about self-doubt. Not so much anymore. I guess the track record's long enough now. But sometimes when I encounter something completely new, you can feel that knee-jerk thing like, oh, maybe I have extended myself too far this time, right?
Right, right.
And like when I was working on my PhD with 2 small toddlers in tow, and my husband was also working on his PhD. Early on, man, I was ready to give up. Like I had been out of school for 7, 8 years working, and to go back into academia in a top 10 engineering program, one of the hardest PhD programs in the country,
With 2 kids.
2 kids, and having
Oh,
that
wow.
that dichotomy, just being pulled in 2 different directions, like as a mother
Right.
and a serious engineering PhD student. If you ever read the dedication in my dissertation, it really came down back to my parents, my husband, and Dr. Fowler, who was my advisor at Texas. And really, especially Greg and Dr. Fowler, they believed in me when I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't let me quit.
Mm-hmm.
And
They were your
and I
hype team.
yeah, They were the ones that kept, when my anxiety and doubt were flipping through the roof, they could always kind of bring me down. Yeah, it was them.
Wow. I also feel very like fortunate and blessed like that my parents were my rocks through like some of the worst parts during my like lowest of lows during college or like even in my career. They would always be my number one team to like lift me up in some of the hardest times. So like that really resonates with me, and I feel very fortunate because I know not everybody has that like hype team in the background. What were the challenges you think that you had to overcome whenever you first entered NASA, or was it any cultural, or was it professional or anything like that?
When I first started, we did not have kids yet, but we had been trying, and that's another
Mm-hmm.
thing. We lost two before we had our first.
Oh yeah.
So
That's
and
tough.
around that same time, I lost my mother to cancer.
Oh
So
yeah.
it
Tough
was both
time.
a wonderful time of my life from a professional point of view. I landed in a team. Of course, I was the only girl on that team, but I landed among the most wonderful guys, and they are still my friends to this day. And we were working this cool shuttle mission, space lab mission, and it was right post Challenger, so we were going to be one of the first missions back out of the gate after we started flying again. And that was when I first got into operations and just found my niche there. But so professionally, it was going great. There was, like I said, always that imposter syndrome of, can I really cut this? I mean, I'm doing freaking orbital mechanics for NASA, But on the other hand, I had this great, nurturing, wonderful team, all male team. And the funny thing is, within a year, I was the lead for them. So somebody recognized something in me early on as
Right.
far as leadership. And I think that's where I've learned to become a leader. But, on the personal side, things were difficult. As far as challenges for being a woman, once again, I feel like I'm sort of like, I had this positive star hanging over my head. Like, so the guy that hired me, God rest his soul, Monroe Hardage, he had daughters who were going into STEM fields. And so
Yeah.
he was very positive. I think he had to argue with bosses above him to even hire me. I didn't find that out till later. The boss right above him was not welcoming to females. He and I butted heads a few times. That's a whole nother
Right.
story. I felt like he was working against me. Anyway, but my immediate boss was definitely working for me and believed in me. And the folks that I worked with, my lead on that mission was like another dad to me. He also had daughters going into STEM. I've always kind of been blessed with these guys who maybe, you would think in their background, the time frame that they grew up, that they wouldn't be welcoming to women in STEM, but they were all
Right.
like dads of daughters who were interested in
Right.
STEM, probably because of them, because they worked at NASA, right? And so
Yeah.
therefore they were unlike some of their peers, and somehow I just always ended up with men mentors in my life like that. There weren't any women mentors. That wasn't even a thing that was going to happen.
Right.
So, but
Right.
I was blessed that I always had the ones that were like ahead of their time, like in
For
a lot of
sure.
ways.
Yeah. So, like, do you ever feel so you excelled and you're putting these leadership positions, but like, did you ever feel like you had to work harder than, say, your male colleagues? And like, that's why maybe they were even more welcome. Like, some of them, even if they didn't have daughters, right? They're like, well, she works her butt off, right? So, you know what I'm saying?
There was a lot of, well, there's little incidents, like I always said I never went around looking for or expecting to be discriminated against or doubted, but
For sure.
when it struck me straight in the face, I certainly knew what it was.
For
If it
sure.
walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
I know.
Okay?
I know.
And there were definitely those moments in college where somebody just sees you and assumes you're the secretary. My
Right.
daughter's a physician, and she still
Yeah.
gets that. Like in
Yeah.
2021,
Yeah.
like where people think she's the med tech or the nurse, even though it says doctor whatever on her white
Right.
coat. They'll
The
still refer
microaggressions
to
are
her as
real.
that nurse, or something.
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
and she just sort of like rolls with it, But
Right.
there's been those moments. There's been, especially when I would come into a new situation with people that didn't know me, or maybe they didn't know, like moved to a new project or something like that. After I taught at Mississippi State for a while and came back to NASA, I was put into this role on the Ares 1 rocket development, and I encountered this chief engineer who apparently just looked at me and immediately assumed I was an idiot, right? Let's just say he got disabused of that notion in a very public and very
I'm here for that.
resounding way.
Yes. Good.
It's like, oh, darling, you just stepped into my trap. Oh, wait.
Right, right. I always tell people too, like I try to be very like take a critical eye of, especially whenever it comes to like sexism in the workplace. I try, because like we work with a lot of guys, and guys can be stupid, you know, they can say some stupid stuff and they don't always mean it in the way that it might come across. And sometimes, and I'm learning to how to communicate, like, hey, let's think about like how that comes across to me as a woman, right? And you know, how to communicate better with your fellow engineer in a workplace to environment. So I know I've read about, I want to hear about the story about the Kranz fax. Don't you have a fax from Gene
Oh,
Kranz, right?
hold on. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Where'd it go? Oh, wait, it's up there.
That's so tell me this story.
So when I landed at NASA, the first mission I worked was the STS-35. Yes, that's how old I am. Astro 1 mission. So in the payload bay, it wasn't a typical Space Lab mission. It didn't have a module. The Space Lab module was like the precursor to the U.S. lab on the International Space Station. So it didn't have a pressurized controlled module for humans to go into. The whole point of that mission was astronomy, and it had 4 telescopes in the payload bay that you would use the orbiter to do the gross pointing, and then you would use its pointing system to point to the stars that the astronomers wanted to observe. Anyway, we get into that mission, long story short, but Columbia had a problem with a hydrogen leak, and it plagued us for most of that year. I don't know how many times we sat on the launch pad and then got scrubbed. Like, started like in April, and it just kept moving around the calendar. And we finally, in early December 1990, we launched. It's like we were cursed, man. Like everything that could go wrong was going wrong. Our equipment wasn't working right. The star acquisition, the pointing system was not locking onto targets. It had some kind of glitch. We're trying to figure it. We had teams of people trying to figure out in real time what this glitch was. We had problems with the orbiter. It couldn't dump water, which it has to dump water from the fuel cell. And anyway, it was just
A nightmare.
We were snake bit. We were snake bit. And yet we persevered, and we found a way to grab victory from the jaws of defeat. I should note that I was about 8 months pregnant with my second child, and because we'd slipped all around the year, like I was really worried that this mission I'd worked on for 4 years, I was going to miss working it because it was going to slip so much that I was, going to be on maternity leave. So anyway, sometime during the mission, Gene Kranz, who was by then up in management at Johnson Space Center, he wasn't flight director anymore, but he's a junkie, right? He's got to listen to these missions. He's paying attention, and he sends this fax, because, it was 1990. And it says, I'm going to read it to you. It says, I've been listening to you all day long, doing a superb job and writing the book on what real-time ops is all about. There's no doubt that you guys and gals have a real handle on what you need to do. Get on with doing it without the bureaucracy trying to manage every step. You've moved out to get something big out of the mission. Keep going, and you will write the shuttle textbook for a new generation of operators. Thanks, wow. Gene Kranz. So this fax comes in, and it quickly gets passed, duplicated and passed throughout the control center at Marshall, where I was, and Johnson. I mean, he was talking to all of us. It's addressed to the flight director of the team, Marshall, Goddard, et al., is what it says. Yeah. And so we were a part of this, and I was 27, and the team I led was all younger than me. Right. Mm-hmm. And so Apollo 13, the movie hadn't come out yet. He was famous within NASA circles, but not famous yet. And we were so new to the NASA team, like, I didn't even know who he was. I'm like, everybody was all excited. I'm like, who's G. Kranz? Because it's signed G. Kranz. Like, and my boss at the time looked at me with horror, and he was like, you don't know who that is? And he explained it. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. So after the mission was over, we all had copies of this. And when I started reading about him and finding out who he was and the role he had played in saving the Apollo 13 astronauts, I kind of came to realize that this was a big deal. And so I kept this fax, and I moved it with me to every office I ever was in. And at some point, I put it in a frame because it was getting kind of ratty. When I was leaving NASA in 2004 to go to Mississippi State to teach, which, hey, spoiler alert, I did come back. Unbeknownst to me, my friend Jay, I was having to go to Houston for one last trip to just tie up some loose ends before I left. I was a Payload Ops Director for ISS at the time. The first time I was Payload Ops Director. I did it again later. He slipped into my office, stole the fax out of the frame. He had been going to JSC a lot, was spending a lot of time down there, and he knew some people, and he knew what Gene Kranz meant to me at this point in my career. And he arranged, unbeknownst to me, for me to meet him. I was told we were going over to Space Center Houston to meet Bob Kirby because he was like the payload rep in the astronaut office at the time, and that he was at Space Center Houston for an event. And so we had to go over there and meet him there. And we go into this room, this conference room. It wasn't Bob Kirby. It was it was Gene Kranz. So I got to do the photo op. He signed my fax, so it's signed now.
That's amazing. Wow.
And it turned into, instead of just a meet and greet, it turned into an hour discussion. And him telling stories. We were all just sitting there with our mouths hanging open, like, just soaking it in.
Is this real? I'm sure.
Like, really hearing all these stories straight from this man's mouth, right? Like
a legend. Yeah.
It was sort of, meeting your hero kind of thing. So.
Yeah. Working in that kind of mission control environment, like a lot of people don't realize how incredibly stressful it is and how much you lean on the teams that you're with, and like the missions that you do in supporting the International Space Station and the astronauts on board. You kind of learn a lot, and you learn very fast, and it's very drinking from the fire hose kind of environment. And having someone acknowledge the hard work that you put through and the stress and like long hours that you put through, and someone so legendary like Gene Kranz to acknowledge that is incredible too. So
yeah, I mean, once I understood the context of who he was, the compliment seemed massive.
For sure.
And when you're in the thick of it, you don't realize you're doing something extraordinary. You're so invested in the mission that you're just trying to do whatever you can. And we were working 13, 14, 15-hour shifts. If my OB had known what I was doing, he would have forbidden me. So that's why I never told him. I'm sure he would have said I can't do it. I didn't ask permission.
Right. You tell me no, I'm going to do it anyway, or prove you wrong.
So we always joked that my son, Colin, worked that shuttle mission. And that next summer, there was another lady on the team who was also pregnant. She was actually a few weeks further ahead than me. And that summer, when we had our big, NASA picnic at Marshall, there would usually be recently flown astronauts who would come and mingle with the folk. And the two payload specialists from Astro One, who I'd worked with closely for 4 years, were at the picnic, and they sought me and this other lady out because they knew we were working massively pregnant. And it was Ron Parise and Sam Durant's. They sought us out, and they wanted to meet the Astrobabies, as they called them. So
that's adorable.
Yeah, and so I have a picture of Sam kneeling down beside my son's stroller, taking a picture with him. And it kind of struck me that they knew that it was so cool to them that. I mean, they looked at that as us making a sacrifice to support them. And I never looked at it that way. I looked at it as the most exciting thing that ever happened to me, like at that point in my life. And I was just praying I didn't have to miss. Like if we'd had one more slip, I would have missed that.
We've talked a lot about your career and professional life. I know probably the Gene Kranz facts has always been an inspiration to you. Is there any other things that have inspired you throughout your career? People or missions or anything like that?
I mean, everything we do in NASA. I mean, the Mars 2020, all that is so cool. Flying helicopters on another world.
On Mars? Yeah. Crazy.
So I've always been super proud to be part of NASA. But the human spaceflight thing has always been very important to me. I've always said that I'm all about the mission. I'm very mission driven. And people throw that term around, but I know what it means personally. And so I've always been blessed to be working on really cool stuff. And on ISS, it was always one of the nice things about being in the payload part of ISS. For those who don't know, payload is NASA code for the reason you're flying, right? So in ISS payload, we're talking about science, and science to further exploration, science to help life back on Earth. And so even though sometimes you can just get bogged down in the mundane and the little petty problems of just any workplace, even when it might be the coolest workplace on Earth, you're always this close to the scientists and what they're trying to do and the breakthroughs they're making that you're enabling, right? So there's that. And the inspirations as far as other people, I feel like at this point in my time, I am an absolute connoisseur of great leadership. And I've seen some great examples of it. Hopefully I've been a great example of it. some people think I am,
I do.
but I really do try to be. I am a student of it. I've already mentioned people like professors like Wally Fowler at Texas, Phil Bridges, Keith Koenig, Charlie Clyett at Mississippi State, who are just sort of legends at this point if you're a Mississippi State person. But there were others along the way, like I said, my first boss, a number of coworkers, so many people who've just been there along the way.
That brings up a really good point too. So I hear mentorship, right? Mentorship has been really influential in your life. I know I talk to a lot of young people about how important it is to find a mentor professionally in college or anything like that. You've obviously found mentorship from people that have inspired you. Have you enjoyed being a mentor? Because obviously you're working in the STEM program at NASA, and I know you've mentored me. You've mentored Paramita. You've been a mentor. Have you enjoyed that piece of it as well?
Absolutely. The thing I liked the most for the 4 years I was in academia was the interaction with students kind of outside the classroom. Inside and outside, but especially outside. I think and my husband's another one. That. He's always there.
Mm-hmm.
Students. Gosh, it's the most important thing. Like,
Yeah.
how do you not give back when you had so much given to you, right? Like, and it just seems natural. I haven't been a formal mentor very many times. It just seems to be like this organic mentorship happens in both directions. And late in my career too, I find that there's a lot of co-mentoring that goes on, right, in the latter part of your career, where like my deputy, that she and I ran the Payload Ops Director office together at Marshall a few years ago. We were constantly co-mentoring each other. In the trenches in both
Right.
strategic and tactical ways. And that happens a lot now with my immediate boss, who's the deputy associate administrator for STEM engagement, a wonderful lady named Elaine Ho. She's probably 15 years younger than me. There's some things I mentor her on, and there's a whole lot of things she mentors me on. She was very high up in the Obama administration. She has a resume that makes me feel inadequate as a human, but she's a wonderful person. But we co-mentor each other. In STEM engagement, it's amazing because my name gets out there to a lot of students organically. Like right now, I'm mentoring formally a young woman who basically cold called me. She's an engineering student in California who I forgot where she saw or heard my name. She just emailed me, and I started mentoring her. That's kind of fun.
I think she shot her shot, right? Like that's kind of what we've talked about. So Paramita, she got her opportunity with the head up display because she cold emailed
Yeah,
somebody,
I,
and
I
that's
thought that was really gutsy of her.
yeah. And I think sometimes if you find someone interesting and you just are like, I want to get to know this person. I really admire them professionally, and let's see where this goes, where the rabbit hole goes. So I think there's something to be said about the courage it takes to just cold call someone.
Well, I mentioned my wonderful team that I lead now, and as wonderful and as dedicated and as talented as they are, I think what they lacked before I got there was a project manager who was really into employee development. Right. So I've been a people manager several times in my career, and I'm not right now. I'm a project manager, but projects only run with people. And
Right.
so I see these, and they're almost all women, probably because a lot of them are former teachers. First time in my career, I worked with predominantly women. Because I've gone from the STEM, really hardcore STEM field into the education world, but they're just hungry for understanding of how to be, because they aspire to be where I am, right? They aspire to be a project manager. They know education, but and I always say, it's like, you guys know education. I don't. I know leadership and project management. We have these opposite skills, so they complement really well. So I take it as part of my job, although no one ever told me it was. It's not written down anywhere that I'm going to be a mentor to them and try to teach them what I know. So I involve them in all the project management decisions. We're probably talking about 5, 6, 7 key people that help make my project work. And I consider all of them deputy project managers. They're not labeled that way officially, but they're hungry to know, how do you do the budget stuff? They're hungry to know, how do I lead my sub teams on this team? Like, how do you do that? Like, what's the best way to do that? How do you deal with a problem employee? How do I speak so that upper management understands me? Right? Like, so I try to involve them, even though it's not at their level. Like, so when I make a decision, I tell them the why, right? Well, here's the pressure that Congress is putting on Mike, or all of our mutual boss. Here's what OMB is doing, Office Management and Budget. Here's the landscape. So you can understand, like, from your knothole, this decision probably makes no sense. And I get that. But here are the other forces at work. And and they appreciate it. They've told me, like, he said, nobody's ever opened that up for me before. And I think maybe part of it was because I just so recently finally understood the inner workings of our agency within the federal landscape. And it's been such a series of aha moments for me, because I've always kind of been down here doing, seemingly a million miles away from the headquarters machine. And so now I kind of get it. And I think when you can understand a very, very smart man whom you know, because you've met him with and had wine with him, astronaut flight director, once told me is that, and they taught this in the Army, and I think it's something he's always advised, is you should always be thinking from the perspective of your boss 2 levels up, and that way you can better understand how you fit into the solution, right? Because you need to understand what their concerns are up there. The flip side is also true. They need to try to understand the concerns down at the working troop level too. But like I said, I'm a great consumer and curator of leadership knowledge. And that was a nugget that he said one day that I'm like, okay, I'm writing that down.
Right.
And so that's what I'm trying to do with my team, mentoring and developing them, is giving them that window 2 levels up or 3 levels up, so they can understand how to better achieve what we all know we need to do for our project, but in the context of the reality of the budget and politics.
So you're like mentoring internally, but also your group externally mentors too, because you're in the STEM outreach. So you're mentoring even young people too, synergizing the internally and external.
I also had a teenager from some school in Nebraska reach out to me, and we did a Zoom, and it was like for a class project. And when we Zoomed, it was in his classroom, and the whole class was there. So he was asking the questions for the whole class.
That's so
But
cool.
That was cool too. So sometimes I get pulled into those sort of random things too.
I love that. So what are you excited about the future of NASA and like STEM?
I'm excited that we now have an administration where STEM engagement's actually back in the budget.
Yes.
We have been not in the budget, and Congress would put us back, but we weren't in the president's ass for the last 4 years, which is horrendous for trying to plan a budget, because you don't know if you're going to have a budget or if you're going to exist. And it's been hard to get people within the agency to take us seriously or to partner with us. But anyway, it's great that we're Pinocchio is a real boy again. That's great. I think just the sheer volume of amazing stuff that's going on. This coming year, we're going to fly the first Artemis mission, uncrewed, but the first test mission. We have James Webb Space Telescope launching. Yep. We have the continuing saga of ingenuity and perseverance on the surface of Mars. There's just a ton of amazing stuff going on in the agency right now. And there's such a focus on STEM education and inspiring that next generation, both internally in NASA and also coming from the White House, that I think it's sort of a golden age for us now. And there's very much a sense that we need to capitalize on it, make hay while the sun shines, because other things can happen politically in the realm of, as I said, broadening participation, reaching kids who aren't as easily reached, reaching kids who don't have the advantages and things that I spoke about in my childhood. The events of last summer and the racial reckoning were ground shifting for me. And it was right as I came into this role, and the two things just dovetailed together. And I could see crystal clear what my mission is. And I'm that person that has to have that mission, right? And my mission is, I tell people all the time that when I'm making decisions in my project, because I'm always balancing priorities and what am I spending my money on? And, within congressional direction, I don't have full control of what I spend my money on, but my money, my project's money, it's not mine, is looking at reach and getting the most bang for the buck. And, you're from Mississippi. So I'm a very visual person. So I have to keep a picture in my head. It's like, who am I working for? And my picture is a 10-year-old Black female child in the Mississippi Delta. When I look at decisions and whether we go this way or that way with the project, I'm like, what does this mean to her? Because, there's one school of thought. There's some people that just want to pour more and more money into museums and science centers, and they're wonderful, right? But I never went to one growing up.
Right. Right.
And I was a white kid, right? And that kid in Indianola or Greenville or whatever, she's never even going to make the 2-hour trek to Jackson, where they have some really cool museums. So if all I do is pour money into museums, we don't reach her. So how do I reach her? And not just reach her in, oh, here's a NASA sticker.
Right.
Here, teacher of said child, here's a lesson plan that's really cool. How do I engage with her and thousands and thousands of other kids just like her
Right.
in a way that makes a difference, that makes them
Yeah.
see a future beyond their little small town and their socioeconomic disadvantage, all the, years and years of just ingrained need. How do I make that difference? I don't have all the answers to that yet, but it does help me make choices between A and B and C and D,
Yeah.
And so I keep
Gosh.
that touchstone. So
Gosh, that just like makes me like that. You're making me tear up, like just hearing it, because like there is such a, you talk about the what your mission is, and I think that's being cognizant of what that mission and keeping that in mind helps you drive forward. That's incredible.
I guess it's just the way I was raised in NASA,
Yeah.
and it's just the way I think. Like that's
Yeah.
how I channel my energy and my purpose.
Yeah.
Some mission.
Well, man, this has been an amazing talk, Carrie. I feel like I've learned more about you, and I feel so inspired too. Like STEM outreach is so important to me, and I love hearing. I love knowing somebody who's in the trenches and doing something that I'm also very passionate about and engaging with kids. I want to start kind of closing us out here. Do you have any final words that you'd like to say before we close out?
So we talked a lot about mentorship and leadership. I read a book once, and it talked about leading from any chair, leading from where you are, leading up, leading down, leading across, right? So everyone should be a leader. Find a way to lead from where you are. And sometimes that's leading through influence, not through positional power, and always reaching back to bring that other person along with you. Like paying attention to your coworkers, to your bosses, to the people underneath you that you lead, that whole idea of mentorship and development. And I think if more of us were doing those two things, as opposed to maybe just looking out for their own self-interest, the whole world would be a better place. Not to be too Pollyanna, but you know what I'm saying? Like those are kind of my two of my greatest life lessons personally. And they're two of the things I try to impart when I can. That's
amazing. So thank you so much again for joining me today on Delta V. This has been a wonderful talk and an inspirational talk. Is there are there links or anything that you should we link in our description below for people to like check out other missions that you're involved in or opportunities?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't, and pretty much everything in our world, the gateway link, you can just type in STEM.NASA.gov and it will open my professional world to you, and there are lots of cool things there. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. We very much appreciate your time and also your stories. Thank you so much for all of that. Thanks so much for tuning in to our third episode of Delta V Podcast with Dr. Carrie Olsen. If you liked this video / podcast, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family members. Also, if you would like to support us in other ways, you can join us on Patreon. All those links will be in the description. So please like, share, and subscribe to the Delta V Podcast and Rocketeer Lady channel on YouTube.